Now today, I'm very honoured to be bringing you a very special pre-recorded interview with a very talented actor, Erik Thomson. Many will know and love Erik for his iconic roles like Dave Rafter in Back to the Rafters, Mitch Stevens in All Saints, George Turner, 800 Words, and more recently, East and West, Aftertaste. He was incredibly generous in sharing colourful stories of his life and achievements, beginning in Scotland, taking a detour to New Zealand, and eventually landing here in Australia. But what's truly remarkable about this interview is that for the very first time ever, Erik speaks publicly about his personal journey with alcohol addiction and how he's managed it. In this profoundly personal conversation, he speaks openly about the shame and guilt associated with addiction, emphasising the importance of understanding what real support looks like and managing expectations of how others can turn up for you. This is a conversation that's really close to Erik's heart, as he hopes sharing his story will help others feel less isolated and encourage them to seek support sooner. And on that, if you or someone else needs support for addiction issues and mental health challenge, here are a few places to consider. Alcohol and Drug Foundation, that's ADF here in Australia. They're a leading organisation delivering evidence-based approaches to minimise alcohol and drug harm. I have had a pretty close relationship myself professionally over the years, and they're so non-judgmental and humane. Now, this is probably one of my favourite men's health resources. It's Mr. Perfect and their men's health directory. It's an incredibly comprehensive guide for men and those who care for them, offering a broad range of support and information on everything from mental health to physical well-being. Yeah, go to mrperfect.org.au. So without further ado, we're going to head to this interview. I hope you enjoy it, and we'll be back once it's over. You're listening to 94.1 FM. It's 3WBC. Erik Thomson, welcome to the show.
Hey Rae, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, here in sunny Melbourne.
Oh, sunny Melbourne. What if it'll
Delightful.
be sunny in a couple of hours? Who knows?
Are you familiar with Melbourne? Have you spent much time here?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I've done a few TV things there, but I recently just did a Christmas Carol. I played Ebenezer Scrooge in a Christmas Carol, so I spent about 9 weeks living in Albert Park by the sea, and yeah, I love Melbourne. It's got so much charm, and I mean, I know people say that about it all the time, but it's its weather is as Crowded House say, four seasons in one day. Yeah, I think they wrote that when they were living in Melbourne.
You being one of the most charming men that have ever graced our screens in many different characters, you've also had feet and hands in a few different countries as well, jumping from Scotland to New Zealand to
Yeah.
Australia. Where's home?
Well, I struggled with that a lot. Like did a lot of work. I always felt like an outsider. I think when I got to New Zealand, I was 7 years old. I had this thick Scottish accent, and kids will pick on anything that's different. Anyone that's different. So my sisters, they just learned how to do a Kiwi accent, and they would put it on when they were at school, and I never did that. Funnily enough, I couldn't be bothered. I just carried on speaking like I did. So yeah, but that sense of identity, and then I came to Australia when I was 28, and I really struggled with that. And then I did a course at university recently just to finish off my Bachelor of Arts in English Literature, and it was a course. It was about the literature of Maori and Pacific Island, islanders, which wasn't written literature. It was the literature that's endemic in their carving and their weaving and their stories and their oral literature. But a lot of it was about identity, and a lot of it was about yeah, in that area. And I decided during that process that I am 100% Scottish, and I'm 100% New Zealander, and I'm 100% Australian. I know it doesn't add up, but as opposed to apologizing for not being, being a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and being a mongrel, I'm actually three pure nationalities all rolled into one, and it just changed my whole perception. So I'm a citizen of all the countries, on a legal basis, but I understand, Scotland is my ancestral home. I used to say I was a Scotsman by heart, a New Zealander by soul, and an Australian. For a while, it was by necessity, but now it's just I'm an Australian because the land, the sky, the birds, the sea, the people, the culture has, you know, been absorbed by me. So, I'm just, yeah, I'm just all of that. So that's given me a lot of peace of mind. I don't feel like I have to keep trying anymore or apologizing anymore for not being, true blue.
Description of where you've traveled around to, because also through your amazing occupation you've seen many parts of Australia as well, haven't you?
Yeah, yeah. Like I mean, I've been to a lot of places, and I've done a couple. I've spent a lot of time in the Red Centre when I did the Alice, and I got a lot of our crew up there were Indigenous, and so we were, they were taking us places that most people don't get to see, and that once I spent a bit of time in the Red Centre, I really started to understand a lot more about Australia because most people just live on the seaboards, and you've really got to get out there, and you've really got to get into that kind of ancient part of the country and culture and stuff. And so that was amazing. And I went and worked on Blueback in Bremer Bay, a place I'd never heard of. When my agent said, you're going to go and do this, this film part, this film Blueback in Bremer Bay, the first thing you do is go on Google Maps and find out where the hell that is. And that's on the southwest coast of West Australia, between Albany and Esperance. So I went there, and the furnace again, WA, Mount Magnet. I had to get on the Google and work out where that was. It was in the Goldfields regions, and I have seen a lot of Australia, and when I did Getaway for a year, I spent, I was lucky enough to spend about 10 days in the southwest wilderness of Tasmania, down in Bathurst Harbour and Port Davey and Melaleuca, and it's you've got to fly in, and it's a 7 day walk out, but it's one of the most, out of all the places that I went in the world doing that show, it was one of the places that really just, it again really it's given me an appreciation of, yeah, all over Australia. So I do know a lot about this country. I've felt it.
Think that when you had that intake of breath, there was almost a shudder in it when you spoke about the place in Tasmania, during your getaway experience, which we might even talk about later.
Yeah,
But a place where you and I met, which is one of the most beautiful places in the world, I think, is Adelaide.
yeah,
Not many people rate it, but my experience of it is just absolutely wonderful. And
yeah,
back in 2019, when I was doing some work within the Australian entertainment industry around the state of mental health of workers within. You and I met on a panel,
yeah,
and it was celebrating Ben Steele. For those of you that don't know Ben Steele, he was an actor in Home and Away. He made it pretty big there, but he went on to do some wonderful work making a documentary called The Show Must Go On, which really highlighted quite in quite a raw manner his experience of how the industry affected his mental health. And we were there for a screening, and we had a panel discussion after that.
yeah. Yeah, I knew Ben was making that. I actually got interviewed, but I ended up on the cutting room floor. So, and
Really?
Well, it's the irony, I didn't care because, I think everything was said and what I said didn't actually add to what he was trying to do, but it kind of embodied the aspects of this industry, which are, well, I guess rejection or, you know, getting cut out of a film, which,
Yeah.
whenever you watch something back, you wonder why that actually happens. But, we joked about it and that it wasn't a big deal for me. And I think Sam Neill, really he's very eloquent and he kind of summed it up really, really beautifully is that, you're only acting, a few percent of the time. What are you when you're not an actor? And if you hang your hat on, if that is your identity, what do you do? I'm an actor. Well, what do you do when you're not an actor? Who are you when you're not an actor? And that's what he said. And I thought, and he's gone on, vineyards and all that kind of stuff. And but those are, I think, fundamental for any young actor coming up is really making sure that they continue to develop themselves. I don't think I ever did that. I think I really hung my identity on my profession, and as long as things were going well in my profession, things were going well for me. If things slowed down, I started slowing down. I started feeling like, oh, hang on, there's something wrong with me. There's something actually wrong with me, and so yeah, how you manage that is a big discussion, and I think we had that discussion when we did that panel.
On what you were just saying then, is there a time that you can remember when things did slow down when you actually felt that sensation?
Well, right now is things are pretty slow career wise. Again, appearances are everything. Like I've just done two plays back to back. One in Adelaide, one in Melbourne. I finished at the end of December, so there's 2 months of the year has passed. Yeah, well, January, February, and I don't really have anything coming up. But I've got a film coming out this year that I made 15 months ago. Called Kangaroo Island, and it's a beautiful film. And you know, having just come off the back of a couple of plays, there's a lot of stuff on social media. People get the impression that you're busy. And in my downtime, I try and, I read plays. I start to talk to other actors. I start to think about ideas. I do courses. I've just done a course in podcasting. Not, I'm not sure whether it's an area that I'll go into, but I like to try and use those times. But I think the down times as an actor, when you're not actually working there, that's part of the job, and how you actually manage that. There's a healthy way to manage it, and there's an unhealthy way to manage it, and I've done both. And obviously, the healthy way to manage it is far superior.
With an unhealthy way?
Beg your pardon?
Can you describe the unhealthy way?
Well, the unhealthy way, I've had struggles with addiction. I've had struggles with alcohol. It's something that I've been dealing with. I started to turn and face it in about 2011, so quite a long time, and I've had long periods of sobriety. And then I've had times where I've fallen off the wagon, and I've needed to find some solace or some kind of whatever in a drug, in something that I needed to just fill that kind of hole, that or deal with not high level anxiety, but just that kind of low level constant anxiety. Or this industry is incredibly fickle, and very insecure, and over a long period of time it can get under your skin. And when you're the sole provider for a family, and everyone's looking at you, and the kids are looking at you, and the food's got to keep coming into the fridge and everything, you can see the money dwindling, and you're going, oh, crap, hopefully we'll get a gig will come in. That stuff is just constant, and I think that kind of stuff has a cumulative effect. And sometimes you just need to stop the fear, and that's when the unhealthy reaching for a bottle or reaching for whatever, just to have a momentary holiday, if you like, a break from that. We know obviously that that doesn't help in the long term. In fact, it makes things worse. But in those moments, you see it as an option. So I've had to do a lot of work on that, and I continue to do a lot of work on that because it's a lifelong thing.
Many people who experience it, unfortunately, don't realise it is a lifelong commitment to taking care of self and managing those things that lead to the unhealthy behaviour that you just described. And thank you so much for being open about that, because it's important that people hear that we all this stuff doesn't discriminate. This isn't a socio-economic thing. It's not an occupational thing. This affects everyone, and I find the more that we speak openly about our experiences, that it's not normalizing it in an unhealthy way, but opens up ways that we can help ourselves and most of all each other. So thank you.
Oh, that's fine. I think I haven't sort of gone and done a Woman's Weekly article or gone on Today or
Is
and
that still around?
made a big announcement, about anything because I think that's. But when the question's asked, I don't back away from it. I think I think we're fortunate enough in this generation. It's really only in the last maybe 10, 15 years where people don't mind coming out and talking about it. I mean, really high profile people, and in my business, people like Brad Pitt or, Ben Affleck, they go, yeah, look, I've had struggles. I am an alcoholic. I have had struggles with addiction. Everyone, and so suddenly some of their behaviors have context. They're also incredibly creative people. They're also working under a huge amount of pressure when someone's putting $150 million in a film and you're the guy wearing the Batman suit. It's got to be, you walk on set, you fall down, and there's a lot of pressure. I mean, I've never had that level of pressure, but I have been in situations on, say, 800 Words where I was in every scene every day, without me. Like one day I was just not, I was sick, I wasn't well. And the producer said, "Oh, how are you feeling?" And I was like, "Oh, just terrible. I really want to go home." And he just went, "Well, pity, isn't it?" You know, there was no,
Money, isn't it?
there was, sorry,
Time's money.
it's time is money. And it's like, okay, we can just change the schedule because there was nowhere to change it to. We had that location for one day. You can't take time off, and when I did Scrooge recently, I had an understudy, and that's the first time I've ever had an understudy. And one day I was doing 9 performances a week. It was full on. It was really really hard work. And one morning, on Saturday, I just woke up and said, I really can't do. I need a mental health day off. And so I contacted the producers and said, I can't go on today. And of course, that throws everyone into, oh my God, here we go. And, Tony Coughlin, he stepped in and he did a marvelous job. Everyone stepped up. All the swing actors had to go into the other roles that they knew. And it was really heartening to see a company come together and hold each other up. And, I had that day off, but it actually turned out to be a really, really positive experience for not just for me for having the break, but for everyone. But usually you just actors tend not to get sick because you just can't.
You
You
can't.
just you
And do you
just
think
can't.
that's where some of the substance misuse might come in as well, in terms of being able to keep agile and appearing okay? I'm thinking of people like, Matthew Perry, who's, sadly not with us anymore,
Yeah.
but, his story, I think, really, really highlighted the reality of addiction and how, we talk about high functioning people within addiction, And he appears to have been one of those people that was just so overlooked during his time of need.
Yeah, and he's earning lots of money. He's doing this and that. I mean, I liked Friends, but I wasn't like a religious Friends watcher. But whenever you'd tune in, you'd go, "Oh shit, he's looking really puffy and big," and or "Oh my God, he's looking so skinny." He was, and I've read his book, and he was about as bad as you can get it, and he has, and it's even worse because he's got hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank. So, paying whatever for whatever. There's a story there where he flew from Switzerland to Los Angeles in a private jet. And then when he got to Los Angeles, they said that they couldn't distribute the amount of OxyContin or whatever the drug it was that he'd been given. So he got back on the private jet and flew back to Switzerland to fill up his prescription. I mean, that's the levels that you go to. And that was his curse in the end was, he ended up with, it is incredibly sad because he did try and it's a powerful thing. And I think the more successful you are in some ways, the less sympathy people have for the fact that you're struggling against something. So
How did you personally feel when you were going through your challenges? Did you feel that you could get support, especially on the back of where we met through Entertainment Assist and that world first research into how we develop better supports, better structure, better infrastructure for the entertainment industry to support people? How did you fare?
well, I think, I mean, I was, I was I went to AA. I had fellowship through AA, and then if I had a stumble, then one of the things that comes up is shame. Shame is a massive thing, and that can keep you away, can keep you away from asking for help because you don't want to lean on anyone anymore, and then the loneliness kicks in, and then the isolation kicks in, and then you've got a combination of shame, loneliness, and isolation, and then the only way you can feel better is to stay in the cycle. In terms of but I've fortunately, I had family support, and I had friends, and I had people, but again, if it happens, if you stumble several times in a row, you start to feel like, oh well, no one, people are just going to give up. They're going to give up on me because they think it's a kind of, it's a moral failing. It's like, well, you had a choice. It's there, but with addiction, it's not a moral failure. Whether you call it a disease or an allergy or whatever, and there's all kinds of discussions around that. It's certainly a very powerful thing that manifests itself in so many different forms. Yes, we're talking about alcohol or drugs, but we're also talking simple things like, well, workaholism, shopping, money, social media, porn, whatever it could be. It's escape, and it keeps you away from yourself, and it keeps you away from, yeah, it keeps you it keeps you away from those uncomfortable feelings that you don't want to have to deal with, or you haven't actually developed the skills to deal with them, because in this country, like, and again, we're talking about it, probably alcohol more than anything in this country, more than any, you celebrate everything by having a drink, you commiserate everything by having a drink. Alcohol is an accepted substance, but it's actually one of the most poisonous substances on earth, but you can buy it on every street corner. And it's yeah, yeah.
You know, on that, I'm just fascinated just listening to this. You played some pretty big role, well, in big series like All Saints as Mitch. Mitch,
Yeah,
what's Mitch's
yeah.
surname?
Mitch Stevens.
Mitch Stevens. So Mitch, that was a big, long role of turning up, and then of course, the beautiful Dave Rafter for many, many years as well. What you've just been describing about, the loneliness and shame and sometimes support for, challenging feelings. Did that affect any of those roles in how you played them?
Well, with All Saints was, was when, how old was I? I was around about 30, I think, or 29, 30, 30, yeah, 30 to 34 when I did that. And I think, that was in the late 90s, early 2000s. So the industry was still all a little bit, salubrious. People back then, you know, getting, drinking and going out and partying and Friday night drinks was all fine. There's no OH&S going, okay, well, you can't serve alcohol at the, when you rap on a Friday and pull beers out. And there was a time it was a really hot day and this is on Rafters, a really, really hot day in Concord in Sydney. And the caterers were doing Mexican. So Georgie and I said, why don't we just buy a couple of ice cold cases of ice cold Coronas with lime? Everyone, just one for everyone. And then we had a bucket. This was lunchtime on a film set. Now, honestly, and people just loved it. Now, no one obviously got pissed or anything like that. It was just a really lovely thing. You just couldn't do that kind of thing these days. So back in the, back in those days, you'd have a hard weekend, and sometimes the, doing a 14-hour day or doing 14 scenes or whatever on a Monday, and all your lines and everything that you had to do, you were doing it through a cloud of a hangover, or your body wasn't, and your mind weren't up to scratch, and the anxiety that comes with a hangover, and raised levels of that. And we were all in some ways dealing with that. And, well, I won't speak for anybody else. I dealt with that, fairly often, but not to the point where I still managed to do my work. I still managed to do my work at a high level. I was a high functioning alcoholic, and I've never really said that in any public forum. So this is the first time I'm kind of saying it, like it's, and then in Rafters, Rafters, the two things that coincided with, well, the thing that coincided with Rafters was my daughter was 6 months old. Like, was 1 month old when we shot the pilot, and 6 months old when we started shooting the series. So I was going to work on Rafters, playing a dad, and then long hours, and then coming home to a baby and to a wife who had been with that baby all day. And so, you want to provide some relief. And so where do you get that? So my drinking probably spiked a little bit then. And then we had another baby, and suddenly you've got two babies, you're working on Rafters. And it was between season 4 and 5 that I got sober. And so you can see, it's on screen, like you can see it, the difference between me physically, because we had a 2 or 3 month hiatus between the seasons, and during that time I got sober, and when I came back in season 5, I look different. My energy levels were different. It's
What were you seeing that was different?
just you dehydrated, you're puffy, you're kind of dead behind the eyes. It's just not, there's just a lack of presence. You're not really there. I think there's a really good ad for drinking or having hangovers, and it's a family playing in a park, and the mother's playing with a baby, and the man is sitting there and there's a glass over him, like, like a beer schooner, and he's just got his head in his hands because he's just trying to get through the day. You can't enjoy life. And so getting to work and working to me wasn't always a joy. When I was in that situation, I was just getting through the days, and it was the biggest show on TV.
Notice that during that time?
Sorry.
Did anybody on set notice or speak to you about that?
Um, I don't think. I don't think so because again it was still in the 2000s, and sometimes we'd pop over to the pub for lunch and people would have a beer, and no one really, you know I'm sure my makeup artists knew because I was getting ruddy, and I was and a bit of rosacea, so I needed to get touched up a little bit more than other people. But and I was getting heavier, and I wasn't, yeah, I just wasn't in a good space. And then that changed, and episode 5, series 5, I think it was series 5 was only 12 eps, but I'm not sure. Anyway, we things got lighter, things get easier. Life is easier when you're not dealing with that, you know.
It's funny because I'm thinking through the lens of Julie Rafter. I am a Rafters fan. I've seen it all about 4 times, I think.
Yeah.
Something as you're saying, so I thought, oh, gosh, I didn't see any of what you're saying. But what if Julie picked something up, Because I'm still thinking it's Rafters, but
What you mean? You mean Rebecca?
well, yeah, but I think Julie, because I'm like
Yeah,
I
yeah.
believe that it's a real family because you played it so convincingly, all of you,
Mm.
that you really believe that this is a family. And
Yeah. Well,
so my
we were very. I mean, obviously we were very close, and I talked to Rebecca about it. We would have
you
discussions.
talked to her during the
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We would share stuff, and everyone has. Rebecca's got Irish. She's Irish, and I'm Scottish, and the Celts have a propensity, and so we would share our stories, and we were dealing with younger cast members that were dealing with certain issues, mental health issues, and it's something that you don't, everyone loved Rafters, everyone loved it, but I think because of its success, it yeah, it put a lot of the younger cast under a microscope very, very early, and I think that it was very exciting season 1 and maybe season 2, but come season 3, it's like just give me space, give me space. You see actors doing it all the time. They court publicity. They love publicity. They love going and getting dressed up and being made to look beautiful and doing the covers of magazines. But what you do, I'm kind of on a little bit of a tangent here, but what you do when you do that is you turn the tap on to those publications and to the media, and the media wants to know more about your personal life, and you can't at any stage you go, actually, I don't want to do it anymore. Can we just turn that tap off? Because you've already turned it on, and it doesn't go off. You become public property, and people want to know what's going on in your life. And so, I'm thinking probably more Jess Murray. And then when Jess got with Jimmy, I mean, there were paparazzi all the time. There were people hanging outside their house, putting people under a huge amount of pressure to always present well, and not be rude when you bumped into in the public, saying, "Could I get a selfie?" It's like, look, honestly, I really don't feel like it today. It's easier just to go, yep, and you do it,
yes,
and you
yeah,
do it. You put on the brave face, and
mm,
the smile that just
yeah,
vanished instantly. But
yeah. I heard you interviewed in it was after the filming of Back to the Rafters, and you made a comment about potentially being stopped in the street because the role of Dave Rafter and Julie Rafter, or the story behind that, given that Julie wanted to stay in Melbourne and you wanted to, stay up in the country,
Yeah.
that maybe you could actually get stopped in the street to say, hey, that's a bit, you're the man, you should really go and stay with your wife, or that you might be judged personally for that change in the dynamic of your
Mm.
relationship with Julie. Did that ever happen?
I don't remember that happening so much on that, but the big one was in series for four or maybe five. We decided that we would explore. I say we, Rebecca and I, and the writers. We talked about this. We would explore the concept of infidelity and what it is in different ways. So Dave. Brooke Satchwell came on board as an electrician, and we went off to a conference, and everyone got drunk, and Frankie and Dave shared a kiss. There was that, and then they realized, oh, that was stupid, crazy. What were we doing? Meanwhile, back at home, Julie and Cameron Daddo's character were sitting on the couch sharing a bottle of wine and talking quite intimately. They didn't have any physical touch, but there was clearly an attraction and clearly a kind of a rapport going on that perhaps was over the boundaries, and it was the response that I got from that was, "Oh, how dare you, Dave? You cheated on your wife. You cheated on Julie and everything." And because I thought, and you hear it all the time, it's not about the physical; it's about an emotional attachment that really annoys women, or that really gets under women's skin, that they couldn't deal with it. And then this happened, and the response was quite the opposite of what I kind of expected. But yeah, and so yeah, I got a bit of grief about that.
Did Rebecca receive anything about the Cameron situation?
No, no, no. She was supported. How dare your husband, do that? It was quite, it was quite surprising, but it was a social experiment in some ways, because
Yeah,
Rafters was so uh, was everywhere,
yeah,
omnipotent, I suppose. That
mm,
you could really gauge where audiences were at.
yeah,
And where the population was at, and where people's sentiments lay, because people would sit at home on the couch as a family back in those days and watch these things, and these things would come up, and it would be a little bit like, Gogglebox. I guess they'd all be having their
yeah.
comment, oh, don't do that.
Mm.
And similarly, sorry, we've got dogs. And there's oh,
Gosh, this gives me a bit of a segue in actually, because I wanted to just comment there as you're sort of talking about, the thoughtfulness around scripting and bringing themes out. There was a discussion you and I had a little while back about, some mental health themes within the series. And your comment was around maybe they could have pushed a little bit harder about Dave's experience around mental health issues.
yeah. Well, Dave went into we had I think it was the end of after Melissa's character died. Dave kind of went into, well, all the characters went into a little bit of a hole, but he was struggling with his mental health, and during season four, I think, or three, and then it was very much about I was happy to explore that. It gave me some meat to actually get my teeth into. But between seasons, the producers decided not to that to come back, and he was all right. He was fixed. They didn't take him on the journey to fix him, which I thought was a real cop out.
Where would you have liked it to have gone?
Well, I would have liked to have seen how he fixed himself, or what support he got, or what methods he used, or whether he maybe went to a men's group, or maybe he went to a psychologist and did some work on his, because he was he was an adopted kid, and maybe there was trauma, childhood trauma, whatever it was. It would have been bold to do that, and a really interesting storyline for me to play. But the producers thought, oh, it's a bit depressing, ironically.
Do you have any say, or can you actually make those recommendations?
Well, I think at the time I probably voiced my discontent, the fact that you'd served me up a really meaty storyline and something that I thought was going to help the male members of the audience, and also perhaps the wider population, just to understand mental health, and if there is help out there, and how do we deal with it healthily or unhealthily, and it was an opportunity missed. Whereas other characters were getting opportunities to kind of, go through the drama. I was, it was decided that we would just go around it and come out at the other end, and everything had been done. So perhaps it was reflective of the time. We're talking around probably 2010, 2011, where, and even back that far, people didn't really want to talk about these kind of things, get on with it, have a beer.
We've come an enormous way in terms of how we speak about mental health. And I think on just what you were saying, how have things changed, do you think, in how we address, given that you've played other roles since then, George in 800 Words, you've got East and West also, we're going to talk about Aftertaste as well, which is a very different character, but also one that appears to be quite challenged by mental health issues too.
In Aftertaste.
Oh.
Yeah, well, again, we we wanted to, and I think we started to address it in the second series, and we're going to continue to address it in the third, of deconstructing this man who found being an arsehole and anger and lashing out at people was a way, what was causing that, where did that come from? That to me is interesting TV. That is character-driven television, where we start to peel back the layers of the character and get and give him a journey. But we weren't renewed for our third series, so we only got to know him a little bit. But I think
There's no chance that it gets picked up by somebody else, and I don't know if the word is rebooted, but as you said, there are just so many stories there, and my curiosity in men's health and a character like East and West was exactly that. I wanted to see where all of that pain was coming.
Yeah. Well, I think unfortunately, fortunately for this show, but The Bear, I don't know if you've watched The Bear. Well, you got to watch The Bear. It's another food show, and it's done in Chicago, and it does what you're talking about. It really looks into it. It's highly recommended. Not only is it brilliantly acted, but there's this amazing episode. Jamie Lee Curtis plays his father, and it's a Christmas episode, his mother, and it's a Christmas episode, and it shows the dysfunction of a family, and it shows, we are the sum total of our surroundings. We are the sum total of our experiences. So it's one of the best episodes of TV I've ever seen. But I think that's on Disney Plus. I think you can see that. But
I have Disney for sure.
And so yeah, but I think going back to Aftertaste now, I don't think it's too late. It's too late.
Wonderful series. I mean, we're sort of going to flip-flop around a little bit now, but it's just been launched on which streaming service? Series 2?
Netflix series
Netflix.
2. So Netflix, it had series 1, just in Australia and New Zealand, and now they've just put series 2 on, and
Yeah.
we streamed in the US on Acorn, which is a streaming service that looks after pretty much British and Australian, New Zealand television shows, and we picked up a lot of I had a lot of fans, I suppose. Not so much with Aftertaste, but with 800 Words was on Acorn as well, and it did really well. And you know, people really, creating, because I was involved in the creation, or not so much a creator of Aftertaste, but I was involved in it from the very beginning. I saw how we progressed and how we built the characters and how we built the world. And it started off very much about an angry chef, and then you go, okay, well, you can really just watch an episode of Ramsay to see that. So, what do we do more than that? What are we looking at? And so, the introduction of the character of Diana. So there was an intergenerational and an intersex kind of relationship, intergender relationship, should I say? That
Yeah, I was going to say that meant something different to me, but if
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
your story.
I know. But it was very much it became about power, because that was, when we were making it around about the Weinstein thing and the Me Too movement, and men's misuse of power for their own, for their own benefits. And so that was, at the forefront. And, so it's incredibly difficult it's so much work to create an original work of drama that comes from nowhere, you're not creating it from a book or anything. You're coming up with the goods, and you're starting from scratch, and that's challenging. Yeah.
No, I thoroughly enjoyed the series, and Diana.
Yeah,
What a
Natalie.
remarkable actress or actor, I guess
Yeah.
we call them now. But
Yeah.
she and you two together, the chemistry was incredible. But I was mesmerized with her. But also, I loved when Rachel Griffiths made an entry as well,
Yeah.
and that was a pretty full on situation between you and her.
Yeah. And again, it was all dynamics, and Rachel came in with a very strong kind of attitude of how she wanted to go with it, and that was great. And suddenly you've got a show which is very, it's about, gender power relationships, and the way that Rachel's character disarmed Easton, and the way that Diana, Natalie's character, kind of undermined him, and dealt with him, and the humor that we got. But it was certainly, of the time, and I think we explored it well, and I was very disappointed, and I actually let the guy, I let the ABC know, that I thought that they were a little bit gutless in not giving us at least a third season, because 2 seasons is good, but 3 seasons gives you an opportunity to kind of wrap. And you can wrap a story. And we always were aiming for 3 series, and we had plans to finish that arc. So to drop away after 2, I think is a little bit gutless. But there's a lot of that going on at the moment.
Yes, but I want to just go back and pick up at Rafters where you
Sorry,
achieved just
can I just
yes,
interrupt for a second? Can you hear any voices from anywhere else?
no,
Oh, great. Great.
no,
Sorry
we're
about
hearing
that.
voices now. We're
No, no,
channeling
no.
some.
No, there's just Courtney's upstairs, so I'm just, as long as you can't hear her, that's fine.
No, that's fine, and she's welcome to join if that adds anything. So, but I was picking up on that thread from Rafters around you achieving sobriety at series 5, and then completing Rafters, and then whatever you did in between, and then back to the Rafters, and now at Aftertaste. How was your mental health? Because we all know that anyone that's experienced problems with alcohol, I certainly have, the mental health challenges that come along with that are quite significant too. So how's your mental health traveling during that period?
Well, Aftertaste was fine. I mean, I was in South Australia. We were shooting during COVID,
Oh,
and I was sober, and and healthy, and everything was fine, and the workload was high, but again, I was the difference of I really loved working in my own home state and where I was at the time, and but what I hadn't factored into the fact was at the end of the day, you come home, and when you walk through the door, you don't have that time to decompress. You go from the role that you play. In an actor's case, you're playing a role, but Eric is also working at playing that role. So you're spending time in the head of someone else. You're also spending time in your own head. You've got your own interpersonal relationships happening on set. And then you drive down the road and you walk into your house, and then you're just a dad and a husband. And when you work away from home, you have different challenges, but you at least have a time to decompress and not to focus more in on the work. But then you've got to deal with perhaps loneliness. What happens when you shut the door of that hotel room or the apartment room, and there you are by yourself. It's quite. Whenever I've gone away, I would be really happy just to get on that plane and fly away. If I knew I was going for a job for a few weeks, but a couple of days later, I'd be missing home. So it's free. The idea of freedom. It's so you're constantly juggling it all. Yeah. So mental health and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I'd done a film called Coming Home in the Dark in 2019. Yeah, 2019.
When you and I met, you just
Yeah,
finished them.
I just
Yes.
finished that, and that was pre-COVID, and that was a tremendously challenging role, and
It's a horror movie.
it's a kind of thriller horror. It's a psychological. It's very it's the kind of film that everyone should see once because it's a great piece of filmmaking. The director, James Ashcroft, he's just done a second film with John Lithgow and Jeffrey Rush called The Rule of Jenny Penn, and he's just been tapped to direct Robert De Niro in a new film I think for Netflix. I'm not sure, but he's just a New Zealand man. And he's gone from a $1.5 million film, which was Coming Home in the Dark, to working with Robert De Niro in two films. Second film working with Jeffrey Rush, and it's Jeffrey's first film back after kind of being in as we referred to in Aftertaste, bad man exile. He
Of course.
and so and working with John Lithgow, and it's been winning awards at horror movie festivals. It's set in an old folks' home, just by the by. It's based on a short story by the same writer who wrote Coming Home in the Dark, and it's set in an old folks' home with all these people who are going slightly demented, or are they demented? And one of the characters, John Lithgow's character, has got this little doll that he calls Jenny Penn, and he kind of torments and haunts all the other old people in the old folks' home, and it becomes this kind of psychological horror movie, quite disturbing. Apparently, again, James is developing that side of his kind of auteurship, the director, but
Back
yeah,
to your mental health, because I don't know if you deliberately sidestepped that one, but if we can come back into that.
yeah, into Coming Home in the Dark.
Yeah, and generally we've talked about alcoholism and addiction, but we've not talked about, things like anxiety and depression that can be derivative of.
Yeah, well, we did Coming Home in the Dark, and as the title suggested, we were working at night, a lot. We were, so you're going to work at 5 o'clock, you're coming home at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it's the end of your day, and I think I'd been sober for a couple of years prior to that, and then I think I picked up. I needed to decompress, and on a few occasions, I would, come home and I would drink, and then I'd go to sleep and wake up and go back to work at 5 o'clock at night. I was working to kind of doing night shifts, existing in this tormenting world. I was joking with the producer the other day. We were celebrating James's success on Instagram, and we were talking about how brutal the shoot was, and I said, yeah, I'm sure with scraped knees and scratched elbows, and I said, I'm sure you could find traces of my DNA on pavements and trees all around Wellington, and probably fragments of my soul, because it really was the role, I think, that probably more than anything sank me to, or took me to really, really dark places. And so I mentioned at the time that to protect us, we discussed with the producers prior to going into it that we would have a moment's silence at the end of every day. And that's hard to begin with, because everyone just wants to leave when it's 4 o'clock in the morning and it's 4 degrees or whatever. You just want to get in your truck and drive home. But we did it. We would just have that moment just to land again, to step outside of the world that we were living in. Not enough of that happens, not enough of the separation between the work that we do and heading back into real life. There's people, you psych up for a role, but do you psych down after the role? And I think I've read an interview with Danielle Cormack, who's a New Zealand actress. She was in Wentworth and done a lot of stuff. And she was talking about, over the years, we as actors, we accumulate the lives and the journeys and the mental and psychological kind of damage of all the characters that we play, as well as our own, and in a very insecure environment. So unless you can find a way of flushing that out as you go, it just builds up, and yeah, and I think, I'm 34 years in as an actor, and I'm really, really working hard whenever I do work to try and maintain a degree of mental health. Really, that's coming at the forefront, with successes and with occasional failures. But
where do you seek your support from, or interventions around mental health?
Well, like I said, I've got friends and family. I also, if I've had a hard time, or I've lapsed or had a bust or whatever, I'm usually fairly open with the people that I work with. I've got it under control, and I'm 99.9% of the time fine. But as long as I'm managing myself well, and also going into the work that I'm doing, I prepare the environment for the work. I make sure that when schedules come out, I might identify areas where things are going to be a little bit harder on me, and not just go, she'll be right, and just get on with it. It's just being a little bit more conscious
Yeah,
about.
you mentioned before about going home in the dark and the silence at the end of the day. And I remember when I was on stage with you, you mentioned that you also, I don't know if it was you or somebody, introduced I'm going to probably pronounce this incorrectly, but a Māori mindfulness practice.
Yeah.
Which was part of that silence, which became very symbolic and almost spiritual. But is that what you're talking about in terms of preparing your environment?
Well, that was part of. So we would do the minute silence, but whenever you go, in the Maori culture, whenever you go onto tapu or sacred land, and that's usually like cemeteries. Usually they're fenced off, and at the gate there's a tap and or a bowl of water. Usually a tap has been plumbed out to there. So when you go in and you pay respects to your dead ancestors, you come out, and at the end of it, you wash that off you. So you get some water in your hand and you splash across your face. And this actually happens in the film as well. One of the characters does something terrible, but he cleanses himself at the end, which is ironic. But so we would have this bowl as we left set to do the same thing. So we and a lot of people said, look, we're going to take this on to other New Zealand productions. I've never done that kind of thing in Australia. You know, we always have, you know, perhaps smoking ceremonies and welcome to country when we begin things. But I just think that, you know, with storytelling, with characters, with making films, we just have to be a little bit more careful with the fragility of our spirit, you know, and certainly as actors, you know, you know, we're vulnerable, you know, like a lot of artists, you know, we exist in a kind of thinner kind of environment where we need to have access to our vulnerability, but we also need to be strong and hard to deal with the challenges of the industry. That's the paradox.
I think during my time in the industry through Entertainment Assist, there was a lot of talk about vicarious trauma, which is what you've just described, especially when playing characters that are traumatized themselves, or you're in scenes that can be very, very confronting. I heard so many stories about people not really understanding the impact of that continuous exposure to that kind of trauma, and not until years later do these things get activated sometimes as well. But I want to go back to the question, do you think the industry is getting better at supporting people who work within it?
Yeah, I think there's you know, usually there's a nurse on set, and one would presume that's just for someone might cut themselves and need a plaster,
Cuts and bruises.
cuts and bruises nurse. But more and more so, there's perhaps that check-in. You know, are you okay? You know, is there anything you need? Yeah, I know you and I had talked previously about, you know, mental health first aid courses, and actually, you know, tuning in, and usually the producers, because in a circle or in the opening speeches, people say we've got an open door policy. If anyone's having a hard time or knows of somebody having a hard time, please come and talk to us. You know, well-being and mental health is being talked about a lot more. Those automatic beers at the end of the day, they don't really happen anymore. You know, there's not, because there's the obvious things of people having to drive home after it, but it's not really seen as a healthy way of dealing with the, you know, the difficulty of the day. So there's a lot more conversation around it, and I think you know, yeah, that's definitely visible now.
Do you think there is enough empathy within the industry? And I mean, you know, from people within your community, your peers, your seniors, given where the sector is in how it produces stuff. I mean, you go back to let's say All Saints Days, where it was on TV. It was TV. We didn't have streaming services. I can't remember how you would say that. But now with these streaming services, that the way that things are produced at, you know, so quickly, and it feels like actors are just put through this sausage machine. Because I mean, I know a few actors myself, and you see they're in that series, oh, and they're in that series as well, and that's all happening at once, and they're just produced at a rate of knots. Because us as consumers, we want to binge a whole series in a weekend, and then we want more. It's big change.
Oh, it's a massive change. I think it's, you talk about a sausage factory, like it's, All Saints and the Home and Aways and all that kind of stuff. They were all, I mean, Home and Away is still going, but All Saints were making an episode of television a week. Um, it was a real grind, but we had an ensemble and we had a good structure around us. Um, People knew you, and people, there was a lot more. I think, yeah, familiarity and that sense of working with a company, like an acting company. Whereas a lot of the jobs now, people come together and it's say Black Snow, for example, I did for Stan, like it's a shorter shoot, maybe 9, 10, 11 weeks. There might be 2 years between series one and series two, as there was with Black Snow. Um, the characters change. The the So if anything, the environments become more difficult for actors because you're always a stranger. You're walking into strange environments and having to have intimate relationships as characters with other actors that you've only just met, as opposed to All Saints and all the older shows, the Rafters shows, where you would spend, more time with. I'd spend more time with Rebecca than I would with Caitlin, my wife at the time. And so.
Difficult when you get to the end of something like that and that family just literally disintegrates and you find a new one, like your on screen family, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time you're disappointed to say goodbye, and some of the times you're relieved to say goodbye to certain people. Um, but like anything, when you do, like when I did a Christmas Carol, we had the Scrooge, the Dickens recently in Melbourne. We had the most wonderful cast. It's a beautiful production. It's Christmas. The music was fantastic. The camaraderie was so brilliant, and the support that everyone gave each other was fantastic. And of course, we formed a WhatsApp group, and we'd be in touch, and people would be doing this and that, and we were all friended each other on social media. But of course, half of that cast has moved on to the next job, and then they've got their new family, and
Yeah.
so catching up with that family, you form these groups of people. You get very close to them very quickly, and then, like you say, they dissipate, and then you will go into another environment. So
You might not go into another environment. There could be that
well,
lull where then, if you're a person who doesn't have the benefit of having a real life family, that can be a very, very polarizing state to be in.
absolutely, and
Um,
yeah, absolutely, and I think that's that thing about theatre, is that it does become, all consuming. Although the money's not great, you're not doing it for the money, you're doing it for the family. You're doing it for the interaction, you're doing it for the celebration and the magic that theatre brings. Yeah.
well, you almost didn't end up on stage at all because I understand back in the day you almost joined the Navy.
Yeah, yeah. That was probably a people pleasing moment. My dad had been involved in the Royal Naval Reserve. He was a doctor, but he was in the Royal Naval Reserve as a lieutenant commander, and his father was a fisherman, and he grew up around the sea, and he loved the Navy. And the Royal Navy back in the sort of 70s and 60s and 70s and 80s was, you know, the best navy in the world and everything. And there was a show called Warships on, that was set in Hong Kong, and all the men would walk around in their white naval suits, and they'd all had these exotic wives and these exotic lives, and it was very glamorous. And I was in Scotland, and I was just having a gap year. I was going to go back to university, but I thought I was back in Scotland, and I had a British passport, and And I walked into a recruitment office to say, I'd like to join in the officer training group, and that would involve sending me to university or whatever, and becoming part of the Royal Navy. And they said, "Oh no, sorry. Even though you're a British citizen, you've got to have been resident in the country for 5 years prior to applying." And I was only 17, so or nearly 18, and I just went, "Well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to sit around for 5 years so I can join." So had they gone, "Welcome," I probably would have gone along with it. And yeah, look, sliding door moment for sure.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? But was acting or, the arts something that sat inside of you always?
Yeah, and I think particularly when I got to New Zealand again as an outsider for whatever reason, I enjoyed. I think the first play I did was the River Shag and the Sea Shag. It was a show about birds.
That's a,
You know,
sounds like bit of something else, yeah.
just to clarify, and it was just, and I just really, I don't know why, I really enjoyed the play of it. I
How
enjoyed
old were you?
7, and I really enjoyed it. And then went to another school, and whenever we would read plays in class in the school journals, I'd always want to play a part. I don't know what it was really. Then we did the Pied Piper at intermediate school when I was like a year, whatever that is, 5 or 6 or something. And I played the Pied Piper, and I got all this fan mail from all the schools around that came to our school and about the Pied Piper, and it wasn't the kind of adulation, but I some somehow sort of felt validated and seen. I felt seen, obviously physically seen, but more than that, I think I felt that perhaps, as psychoanalysts would talk about, maybe you weren't seen at home. Maybe you felt that you weren't seen at home, and maybe you needed a little bit more adulation, a little bit more positive reinforcement on your character. And maybe that was the case. But I also enjoyed.
Like, oh, sorry, I just interrupted, but I just was curious about your relationship with your dad, the doctor who was in the Navy, Scottish.
Yeah.
Male role models for you, including your dad, being strong Scottish men, who were they?
As opposed to him or including him.
Oh, including him.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, Dad was born in 36, so his formative years in Scotland between 3 and 9 was the war. And Granddad was away at the war and working in minesweepers. And prior to the war, he was a fisherman, and post-war, he was a fisherman. So he was always away. Dad was brought up by women. And it was a pre-war baby, so he was of a different generation. And, like both of my great uncles served in the First and Second World Wars, so I kind of had a real, in a very traditional Scottish fishing village. They were fishermen, they were men of the sea. So, and I had my uncle Magnus, I called my son Magnus because my uncle Magnus was a fisherman also. He was on mum's side of the family up in the Shetland Islands. So I had a lot of my role models as a young boy were men of the sea, fishermen. They were, and also on mum's side of the family, they were also pretty much exclusive brethren. They were quite fundamentally Christian. So they were strong, silent types, physically strong, but pacifists. Granddad Sinclair, mum's dad, was a conscientious objector in the Second World War. And of course, that was the worst thing you could possibly be. But yeah, and so dad was he was a hardworking. He became a gynecologist and obstetrician. Actually, that was his job. Maybe because he'd been brought up by women, he had an ease around women, and in those days, a lot of ONGs were men, and that's changed quite a lot recently. A lot of women go into that role because I think, for obvious reasons, women feel much more comfortable with female gynecologists. But he had a really strong career, and he was really highly respected in the community. He had old-fashioned values, and but he was a Scotsman, and he was bringing up a Scottish boy in a different culture, and so at a different time. And I think that's what fathers always deal with. They're like, well, when I was your age, we would do things differently,
Are you
or
the only boy?
I'm the only boy. I've got two sisters, an older and a younger. But I don't think he ever really felt that he was a New Zealander. He was 37 when he got to New Zealand, so he was a Scotsman living in New Zealand, and I think he pined for Scotland all of his life. But it was a great place to bring up children. So, there was a I think intrinsically in a lot of Scots, they call it the doer Scot, there's a kind of melancholy there. There's in a lot of Scots, there's a kind of glass half empty kind of thing. And I don't know exactly where that comes from, but I think, and that's why the whiskey gets out. And I think there's similarly the Irish, there's a propensity for alcoholism and alcohol misuse, and it's kind of like their island away from their struggles, getting on. I don't know. I'm riffing. I don't really know what I'm talking
No,
about now, but
no, you do. No, so it all makes sense because you're talking about that sort of generational piece around alcoholism. It's one of the only drugs I believe that actually passes through your cells. So you genetically pass on. You referenced before, whether it's a disease or an allergy, whatever that might be, but. There's a lot of evidence now to suggest that that is a real thing. So we have to be very careful when we're introducing alcohol to our young children as well. It's not actually okay to have a couple of drinks at the 15-year-old birthday party, because if your kid has the gene, well, they're often running before they even have enough maturity to manage that. So
yeah, and it's the openness that we have now around it. Because Dad said to me when I was about 28, he said, there is a gene in the family, Eric. He knew it because, my great uncle George died at sea. He was a renowned drinker. I never met him. He had a son, Dad's cousin, Derek, who died at the age of 47. Again, I know nothing about it, but I'm just putting two and two together. But prior to that, no one would ever talk about it, and that very, very Protestant kind of, will present the front, but no one will know what happens behind closed doors.
is your
And
dad still with us?
no, he died in 2013 of stomach cancer. He had esophageal cancer when he was 66, managed to get over that, but then formed stomach cancer and passed away, which was, again, like I was there with my sisters, and we were there at the moment of his death, which was beautiful. Well, no, wasn't pretty, but it was beautiful that we could all be there. But it's a pretty full-on thing to see,
Yeah.
death of your father, and it was, yeah,
Were you close with him?
yeah, as close as we could be, being of different generations. I was probably, he came from a working class background. He became a doctor, moved into the middle class. His mother was very proud that they'd finally, after hundreds of years, got to that next class, this aspirational British system. And then he has a son, and that's why joining the Navy for for him that would have been the best thing ever, because I would have then become, I don't know, admiral or whatever. But I became an actor.
Was he proud of that?
Oh no, no, he wasn't. No,
Oh,
no, I don't think so. He was very worried about me because, in his mind, actors were all actors were gay. That was his generation. That a lot of gay men work in the theater industry, and certainly, I mean, that's changed a lot, but it's still, particularly in theater, that's still quite normal, and it's not an issue at all. But for his generation, it was like an actor. And the day after he died, my old schoolmaster, my old headmaster had who was friends with Dad, came along to see him because Dad's body in Scottish tradition lay in state in an open coffin downstairs. And Mr. Morris came along and he told me that Dad had gone along to ask Mr. Morris to try and talk me out of becoming an actor, or to actually not becoming an actor, because I had no intention of becoming an actor, but I was very interested in the arts at school. And Dad wanted him to steer me away from the arts so that I wouldn't get any funny ideas around it. And Mr. Morris, said to Dad, you've got to let your children follow their passions, and
God, Mr. Morris.
well, I understand Dad's concerns, because you all want your children to, I want my children to do whatever they want to do. If they say I want to join the circus, I say great. You realize that you're entering a difficult, insecure environment, but if that makes you happy and you've got a passion for it, then just go for it. And I'll be behind you 100%. I think early in my career, I certainly did a few things that for money, because I wanted to prove to them that I could make a living, and did a couple of ad campaigns in New Zealand, which were very lucrative. But
I did see one early this morning, and it was you playing the role of a father with a baby. I think it was a
yeah,
bank ad or something.
yeah, with Lucy Lawless, Xena,
Yes, from Xena. Yes,
we,
yes, that was
and that was the bank ad, and that paid
yeah.
20 grand back in 1992, I think. And that rolled over, and we made more ads. I made about $65,000 out of that over the course of a period, and that allowed me to buy an apartment at the age of 27 in Auckland, as an actor. But the decisions I was making, it was all about proving to my father and my mother that I could make a living. And I think, but
Did your
before.
mother share the same attitude as your dad?
Yeah, I mean, they still came along and they saw, like I played Hamlet when I was 25, and they came and they saw all my plays. Um, they did support me, but I think there was an element of, yeah, then I came to Australia and I started getting success on TV and winning Logie Awards. And I think after about 20 years in the business, or I think they started to realize that I was actually good and I was appreciated, and that I'd made a good name for myself and I'd done some good work and that it was legitimate. And I think that, so certainly once I got on TV, they could go, oh, that's my son, he's on TV. But
Yeah.
in plays, it doesn't have such a um,
Did they
such.
ever give you feedback on when they watched you on the telly?
Yeah, they usually, yeah, but in a kind of very downplayed. As long as my hair wasn't untidy and I didn't swear, and I was a good guy, that I was representing them well, and that's why. So I did. The first time I asked them not to come and see a play was a play called Angels in America, where I played a gay Jewish New Yorker.
Oh dear.
abandoning his boyfriend when he when he just discovers that he's got AIDS. Amazing play,
Yeah.
and like Pulitzer Prize winning, Tony Award winning play. But I knew some of the content and some of the language. My parents just couldn't deal with it. I don't even think Mum's seen. I don't think she's even seen Aftertaste because the language is pretty blue. She didn't see Somersault because again I played a gay man and had shared an on-screen kiss with Sam Worthington.
Lucky
You know,
you.
well, that's a funny story. I mean, I think Sam, I think he was so, he knew that most of the time he was kind of spending a lot of time with Abby Cornish and forming a relationship with her character. And I reckon he'd kind of put the whole gay kiss out of his mind. And we'd done a scene in the morning, and then we were walking down to lunch. And he said, what scene are we doing after lunch? And I said, oh, we're doing the kissing scene. And he was like, oh, fuck. Oh, that's right. We've got to do that. Oh, no. And it was,
What about that?
it was what?
How did you feel about that? Maybe it was, it was a reaction to kissing you.
Oh, I didn't, I wasn't particularly that interested in kissing him either, but I just knew that I had to do it. And, I'd it was my role, for him, it was just an aspect of his character's journey. But yeah, I think so. I think anything that might have soured my mother's and father's vision of what I was. But Mum didn't. She came across to see A Christmas Carol, which is again, like I say, a beautiful production. She's nearly 86 years old. My sister's brought her across. I doubt whether she'll see me on stage again. You never know, but I doubt whether she will. And that was the
She's in
perfect
New
one.
Zealand.
She's in New Zealand.
Mm.
I doubt whether she will, but if that's the last production that she's ever seen me in, it's the perfect production because it was Dickens. It had a lot of beautiful hymns and beautiful carols, it had a joy to it, and I was pretty good in it too. I've just got to say, even if I do say so myself.
I don't think I've ever seen you in anything that isn't. Um,
Well, that's very kind of you.
how with your parents, I mean, we can all understand the times that they were born in and generations and attitudes and things like that, but how did the kind of lack of validation sit with you, especially now that your father's passed on?
The invalidation,
Yeah, the lack of validation. Yeah.
how did it impact on me?
Yeah, or does it?
Um, no, I think as I'm getting older, I, you know, and it seems like a simple thing to say, and some people have this realization much, much earlier than others, and some people never get it. But you've got to validate yourself. You've got to you cannot seek validation in anyone else. I think that you need to, it's all these cliches that we hear. You've got to learn how to love yourself. You've got to learn how
Mm.
to back yourself. You've got to be you've got to be your own cheerleader. And for some people, that's easier than others. But
Yeah.
I think that I certainly you know I'd guess I'd wished for a little bit more. They expressed it differently. They, in a very Scottish way, was we enjoyed that tonight, Eric, and maybe that meant that we're so proud of you. That was amazing, or the word proud has come out of Mum's mouth and maybe even Dad's. I can't remember, but I think yeah, I think it's probably more about how you deal with it yourself.
Thanks for talking about that as well, because I think biologically we just have a need to please our parents. That's what kids do, and so validation. I agree with the self-validation, but sometimes there's just that feeling that we need that from our parents, or we want to make them happy because that's what children do.
Yeah, and as a father, perhaps because I didn't feel it as much, or I express it. I do express it to my children as often as I can, and I do. I'm very conscious of not overpraising, but certainly recognizing and giving them the attention that they need.
We have a lot more permission these days, don't you think? And a lot more words to express ourselves, or opportunities
Hmm.
than generations before, which I think is really wonderful. And that this part of evolution I think is very exciting in the way that we're interacting with each other. We try very, very hard to talk, really boost people up, and we use words like journey, and gratitude, and all these words that have become very, very popular and sound very, very cliche sometimes, but the alternative is nothing. So I think we'll find more words.
Yeah, yeah, I think we will. I hope we do. But yeah, I mean, and there's just little ways to do it as well. We don't have to. It's there's a lot of pressure on our kids to, because you do hear all that time of you can be the best. All you have to do is work hard and you'll be the best. It's like it's not everyone can be the best. And this is like, I've heard this before, and I'm sure you have as well, is it's okay to be all right. It's okay to be average. It's okay to be, you know, if my son gets, he had a few learning difficulties when he was younger, and now he's getting B's and the occasional A, and he exists around the C, C plus, and I'm really happy for him that he's satisfactory. I'm really happy when he gets that. Um, so yeah,
Think, we've also come away from this hardcore definition of success and failure as well. We're more defining failure as learning, and therefore, I think so. I was listening to an interview with Bill Gates this morning, and he really, really reinforced this. You know, a gift of curiosity is something that not everyone has, and I feel grateful that I got that. But moving into just another question about being Scottish, have you
yeah,
ever played a Scotsman?
yeah. I did a BBC miniseries a few years called The Luminaries, which was based on the Booker Prize winning novel by Eleanor Catton. And it was made by Working Title, from Britain, and it starred Eva Green and Himesh Patel and Eve Hewson, Martin Chokash, who I went to drama school with. Anyway, it was a big production, historical gold mining drama set in 1866, and I played a gun-toting whoremonger called Dick Mannering, and I just wandered around, and they said in the book he was, I think he probably was English, but we just decided to go as Scots, so I just played this Scotsman with, six shooters on both hips and smoking cigars, and he was a despicable man, but I had the best time.
Awesome, Dick Mannering.
Dick Mannering, yeah.
Love it. Because you also played a bit of a gigolo on Pacific Drive, didn't you?
Yeah.
Don't want to talk about that. All right, we can move.
Well, that was the first job that I ever got in Australia, and they offered me a different role actually. And then a couple of days later, they said, "Well, could you play Brett Barrett?" And yeah, he was the gigolo, and he had a boat, and he had a business called Deep Water Pleasure Tours, and basically, so I spent one of my first shooting days. I spent in the cabin with about half a dozen different women coming and going, and it was, I felt I showered a lot at the end of that day. I think I felt quite, nothing really went on. I mean, apart from, what we, the, stage, I mean, or, simulated situations. But during the course of that time, I formed a relationship with Kate Raisin's character, who was the head of the CEO of this company, and I ended up becoming the CEO of the company after she was killed by the serial killer, who was her brother, I think. And it was a soap, and it was my first job, and it was on the Gold Coast, and it was fun for a while, and then it became monotonous. But I met Joe Porter on that job, and Joe Porter is she was the producer of All Saints, Packed to the Rafters, All Was Greener. Now she's working for Wentworth. She did Wentworth, so she's gone to great heights, and so I met some good people then, and that's how my career, I think.
Needless to say, your parents weren't avid viewers of Pacific Drive?
No, well, there weren't many viewers of Pacific Drive at all, really. I think it was a money job made for European daytime television and for late night Australian television. So it was kind of stuck in between. It became a cult. It became a cult hit, which basically means that it was trash that people enjoyed watching because it was trash.
Nothing like a bit of rubbish TV is there at the end of the day. That's my favourite thing to do, is just watch crap on TV after some of the days that I have.
Yeah.
Today not being one of them, of course, because I feel like I've run around all of these amazing characters that you've created and that are so incredibly believable as well, having watched them all. But if you, I mean, you mentioned that you're in a bit of a lull at the moment, and hopefully that doesn't last for very long. But if you were to segue and create an alternative occupation, what would it be?
Well, I'm as we've spoken about, like I'm really interested in, men's mental health. I'm really interested in the kind of, I think, and this isn't an opportunity to bring in the violins and everything, but I think men now, I think they're people just kind of push them aside and think, oh, you'll be right. You're a white middle class, or you're a white man. You're fine. You'll be right. You don't have to deal, with issues. You're not a minority. You've got privilege. You've got this. You've got that. But I think, the cost of living, and men being, generally speaking, being providers, and generally speaking, you know, not having the emotional tools to necessarily deal with the pressures that they're under. We see it manifest in alcoholism and addictions and depression and suicide. Like a lot of guys just can't go, I can't do it, enough. And I had a close friend of mine, or a couple of years ago, do that. Took his own life, and I'm sure that's influenced. That's impacted a lot of people. And I think, I think he felt very marginalized. He'd gone through a marriage breakup, and he felt like he was kind of, his self-worth had gone, So having the ability to recognize, and, the potential risk factors that was presented to men, things that might trigger men to go into those kind of downward spirals, celebrating and honoring men for what they do, and not, you know, especially in countries like Australia and New Zealand, where you can't ever be seen to pat yourself on the back, because then you're a dickhead and you're a wanker and you're full of yourself, so men kind of just never feel kind of validated. They don't self-validate, and no one around them necessarily validates. And if they are validated, it's usually, it's usually when they've got to drink a bottle of Moet out of a cup or something and get smashed on what Mad Monday or whatever it is, and it's usually in sport. And yeah, I just so I'm interested in that. I'm kind of whether or not I do this, I've just done a podcasting course, so I've got a bit of an idea around, keeping this discussion going. I've been speaking to a friend of mine who lives in the country and who's dealt with similar issues that I have, and he's set up a group called Untethered Men, and it's a bunch of men from all over Australia, country, city, whatever, where we're going to get together, starting on Zoom, and just chat about whatever's going on. So the men's groups, and I'm personally, seeing the necessity for men to be connected, to feel connected to community, because men, again, generally speaking, tend to isolate. And so if I was to segue into anything else, I'd like to do that. I don't think I want to give up acting, but I certainly would like to utilize any kind of profile that I might have to normalize the conversation around men's mental health. And again, there's a lot of people doing that. But there can never be too many people doing that. I think, in whether you're a man or a woman or a teenager or whatever, I think, so that's really what I'm kind of focusing my downtime on at the moment. I know that.
Very worthy, and you do, and I want to go back and thank you for everything that you've shared today, which is exactly what you've just described, where you may want to sort of step onto the path of, and that is how we influence and inspire those to, it's more than speaking out. There's a level of understanding and empathy and compassion that needs to be built, especially in the men's health space. We've just, a couple of weeks ago now, Australian government just launched the suicide prevention strategy. Now, given that, at least 75% of suicides here in Australia are male, there's no real reference to it in a suicide prevention strategy. And, go figure that where we're at the moment, it's just absolutely insane. So every voice counts in terms of just shifting the dial, shifting that Titanic just in the direction of men also matter, certainly not to the exclusion of women and women's needs, because that certainly can't be dismissed. But we can do it all.
Yeah, we can do it all, and we can also understand that it might take a couple of generations to really get it going. And schools, are talking. There's mindfulness at schools. People talk about mindfulness. There's wellness classes. That has to start in our primary schools, and it has to continue through our secondary schools, with counsellors and people that the children can actually approach, that people that can keep an eye out and see people that might be slipping through the cracks, and catch them early. Because the boys, I did this thing a few years ago now, and it was a initiation ceremony on Kangaroo Island, where men, and it kind of takes you through this process and the boys are 14, 15. Some of them have never left home. It's most cultures have initiation ceremonies where a boy becomes a man. And we don't have that in this country. There's nothing to mark that separation from leaving the mother and becoming a man. And this process is part of that. There's the Rites of Passage Institute, Dr. Arnie Rubenstein, I think his name is, and I went up to do a leadership course up there a few years ago, and I intend to take my son there either this year or next year to sit around the fire with men and to talk about stuff and for men to share their journeys in life and their attitudes, and no one's sitting there as an angel and no one's sitting there as being perfect, and accepting your imperfections and accepting that you make or have made poor choices in your life is in itself powerful. But to do that with your sons, and with our young people. So I think focusing on the men of my age is important, but I think talking to the 10-year-olds and talking to the 15-year-olds and 20-year-olds and keeping that going, I think is how we could turn this around. It might be a slow process, but it needs to happen.
It's a slow process, but we go back in time and look at evolution and just see how far we've come so fast. And we have, but it does take all of us. We're doing such wonderful things in the world, and even if you look at medicine alone and how many lives that's saving. I heard a statistic, it was actually through Bill Gates, around child vaccination globally. I think is now saving, it was like about 5 million children have been saved in terms of improved vaccinations, or getting vaccinations into the hands of children through philanthropy like his. And you just go, wow, like, who's telling that story? We just tell all these, feed so much shit into the world about negativity and how the world's a terrible place. It's a bloody wonderful place when you balance it out. Yeah, there's terrible things that happen. There's always been terrible things that have happened. But thank you for being a person who really does, contribute something small that is probably going to make a really big impact, because a million people listen to this show. Seriously. Well,
Right.
you mentioned that you get a lot of viewers in Iran.
I do, yeah.
So do I.
Because of all
It comes up on my Spotify statistics. How is that? How is that? Maybe there's just some interest in Australian content.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I know the Iranian thing is because All Saints was a massive hit in Iran. It was called something different then, and I was in Dubai when I did Getaway. I was in Dubai, and we went to the old spice souk, and I was in a saffron shop buying saffron on camera, and this guy said to me, "Doctor?" And I went, "No, no, I'm not a doctor. I'm a presenter at the moment." And he goes, "Doctor, television." And I went, "Yeah, yeah, I played a doctor on television." And he called it something else. And then he went out into the middle, he called out, and all these Iranian men came out, and they all came and crowded around me. And they play it, it's probably cut quite a bit, but they play it all the seasons, and then they start again. So I keep getting fans from Iran. And I actually wanted to go there, and I still would love to go there and take a documentary film crew and just to explore that and go over there I mean, they all think that I'm 30 years old now, so they're all going to be pretty disappointed when I rock up as a 60-year-old in a couple of years' time. But that
Hair
was
and makeup, that'll do the job for you.
a bit of hair and makeup, a bit more than that, I think. But yeah, that was the Iranian connection. But yeah, it's I think countries like that and countries that are oppressed like that, I think they'd look at Australia as a real
Oh.
place of freedom, and I think it is
We
generally.
have no idea what it feels like being somebody else, and I think we both agree that we live in probably the luckiest country and the luckiest space in the whole world,
Yeah,
for many reasons. So
to be down here at the moment, that's for sure.
yes, I can't believe that the 2 hours has gone
Oh,
by so
yeah.
fast, but it has. So. Um, Any final word to listeners, Erik? Words of wisdom.
Uh, you can never put me on the spot and ask to come up with
We just
words.
say you've said it all, like because you have.
I've said it all. Hopefully, there's been enough in there to be of interest to people. It's been lovely to talk. I've been open on this interview about certain aspects of myself that I've probably never really spoken to any media about before. So I feel lighter for doing that, and if it helps anyone, that'd be good. And thanks for the opportunity to chat, Rae.
Well, I thank you for doing it on this show. So we're very grateful for you, Erik Thomson, and hopefully you can come back again for part 2.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you.
Wow, what a way to spend 2 hours with Erik Thomson. Welcome back if you've just tuned in to the live part of the show. The time is just 10 minutes to 12 and you've tuned in to 94.1 FM 3WBC with Rae Bonney, listening to quite an emotion-provoking conversation. That's from my part. That I recently had with Erik Thomson. He's a much-loved and acclaimed actor known for his roles such as Dave Rafter, Impact to the Rafters, Mitch Stevens in All Saints, George Turner, 800 Words, and more recently, East and West in Aftertaste, and so much more, which he just described during the interview. I do want to mention, though, if any of the themes and topics we discussed have brought up uncomfortable feelings for you, please remember help is there. Here's a few options for further support in Australia today. Crisis support, Lifeline 131114. Suicide callback service, that's 1300 659 467, and of course emergency services are 000 here in Australia. If you're listening from another country or later though through the podcast, please reach out to support in your community. So before we do end the show, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you again to Erik Thomson for trusting me to share this part of his story for the first time. It's a powerful reminder that challenges like addiction and alcoholism don't define who we are. Most of us face some kind of challenge, yet we're still capable of the most amazing accomplishments. So remember, don't judge. Be kind, be caring, and most importantly, don't be a beep. To close out, Erik has chosen a couple of special tracks. One, which I'm going to play next, is by the incredible Proclaimers, Sunshine on Leith. And then we've got another one from Crowded House coming straight back after that, which is called Together Alone. And I'll be back next month on Easter Sunday with a very special show. But in the meantime, Paula Hogg is coming up next on her lazy Sunday afternoon show, coming up and taking you through till about 3 p.m. I'm also thrilled to be sharing that all of my shows are available for listening anytime, anywhere on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and of course the original home of YouTube. So until we speak again, please take care, everyone. And here is Sunshine on Leith to kick off a little bit of some songs. Take care, everyone.